This text is from the 8th century Anglo-Saxon monk and scholar Bede from his Ecclesiastical History of the English People. The vision of Drythelm is far more developed as a journey and gives a fuller account of otherworld topography, even foreshadowing the purgatorial landscapes of the 12th and 13th centuries. It therefore serves well as an introduction to the medieval form of the otherworld vision. Drythelm was a monk associated with the monastery of Melrose. At this time a memorable miracle, and like to those of former days, was wrought in Britain. For, to the end that the living might be saved from the death of the soul, a certain person, who had been some time dead, rose again to life, and related many remarkable things he had seen, some of which I have thought fit here briefly to take notice of. There was a master of a family in that district of the Northumbrians, which is called Cunningham, who led a religious life, as did also all that belonged to him. This man fell sick, and his distemper daily increasing, being brought to extremity, he died in the beginning of the night. But in the morning early, he suddenly came to life again, and sat up, upon which all those that sat about the body weeping, fled away in a great fright, only his wife, who loved him best, though in a great consternation and trembling, remained with him. He, comforting her, said,
"Fear not, for I am now truly risen from death, and permitted again to live among men. However, I am not live hereafter as I was wont, but from henceforward after a very different manner."
Then rising immediately, he repaired to the oratory of the little town, and continuing in prayer till day, immediately divided all his substance into 3 parts. One whereof he gave to his wife, another to his children, and the third, belonging to himself, he instantly distributed among the poor. Not long after, he repaired to the monastery of Melrose, which is almost enclosed by the winding of the river Tweed, and having been shaven, went into a private dwelling, which the abbot had provided, where he continued till the day of his death, in such extraordinary contrition of mind and body, that though his tongue had been silent, his life declared that he had seen many things either to be dreaded or coveted, which others knew nothing of. Thus he related what he had seen.
"He that led me had a shining countenance and a bright garment, and we went on silently, as I thought, towards the northeast. Walking on, we came to a vale of great breadth and depth, but of infinite length. On the left it appeared full of dreadful flames, the other side was no less horrid for violent hail and cold snow flying in all directions. Both places were full of men's souls, which seemed by turns to be tossed from one side to the other, as it were by a violent storm. For when the wretches could no longer endure the excess of heat, they leaped into the middle of the cutting cold, and finding no rest there, they leaped back again into the middle of the unquenchable flames. Now whereas an innumerable multitude of deformed spirits were thus alternatively tormented far and near, as far as could be seen, without any intermission, I began to think that this perhaps might be hell, of whose intolerable flames I had often heard talk. My guide, who went before me, answered to my thought, saying, "Do not believe so, for this is not the hell you imagine." When he had conducted me, much frightened with that horrid spectacle, by degrees, to the farther end, on the sudden I saw the place begin to grow dusk and filled with darkness. When I came into it, the darkness, by degrees, grew so thick, that I could see nothing besides it and the shape and garment of him that led me. As we went on through the shades of night, on the sudden there appeared before us frequent globes of black flames, rising as it were out of a great pit, and falling back again into the same. When I had been conducted thither, my leader suddenly vanished, and left me alone in the midst of darkness in this horrid vision, whilst those same globes of fire, without intermission, at one time flew up and at another fell back into the bottom of the abyss. And I observed that all the flames, as they ascended, were full of human souls, which, like sparks flying up with smoke, were sometimes thrown on high, and again, when the vapor of the fire ceased, dropped down into the depth below. Moreover, an insufferable stench came forth with the vapors, and filled all those dark places. Having stood there a long time in much dread, not knowing what to do, which way to turn, or what end I might expect, on the sudden I heard behind me the noise of a most hideous and wretched lamentation, and at the same time a loud laughing, as of a rude multitude insulting captured enemies. When that noise, growing plainer, came up to me, I observed a gang of evil spirits dragging the howling and lamenting souls of men into the midst of the darkness, whilst they themselves laughed and rejoiced. Among those men, as I could discern, there was one shorn like a clergyman, a layman, and a woman. The evil spirits that dragged them went down into the midst of the burning pit, and as they went down deeper, I could no longer distinguish between the lamentation of the men and the laughing of the devils, yet I still had a confused sound in my ears. In the meantime, some of the dark spirits ascended from that flaming abyss, and running forward, beset me on all sides, and much perplexed me with their glaring eyes and the stinking fire which proceeded from their mouths and nostrils, and threatened to lay hold on me with burning tongs, which they had in their hands, yet they durst not touch me, though they frightened me. Being thus on all sides enclosed with enemies and darkness, and looking about on every side for assistance, there appeared behind me, on the way that I came, as it were, the brightness of a star shining amidst the darkness, which increased by degrees, and came rapidly towards me. When it drew near, all those evil spirits, that sought to carry me away with their tongs, dispersed and fled. He, whose approach put them to flight, was the same that lead me before, who, then turning towards the southeast, and having soon brought me out of the darkness, conducted me into an atmosphere of clear light. While he thus led me in open light, I saw a vast wall before us, the length and height of which, in every direction, seemed to be altogether boundless. I began to wonder why we went to the wall, seeing no door, window, or path through it. When we came to the wall, we were presently, I know not by what means, on the top of it, and within it was a vast and delightful field, so full of fragrant flowers that the odor of its delightful sweetness immediately dispelled the stink of the dark furnace, which had pierced me through and through. So great was the light in this place, that it seemed to exceed the brightness of the day, or the sun in its meridian height. In this field were innumerable assemblies of men in white, and many companies seated together rejoicing. As he led me through the midst of those happy inhabitants, I began to think that this might, perhaps, be the kingdom of heaven, of which I had often heard so much. He answered to my thought, saying,
"This is not the kingdom of heaven, as you imagine."
When we had passed those mansions of blessed souls and gone farther on, I discovered before me a much more beautiful light, and therein heard sweet voices of persons singing, and so wonderful a fragrancy proceeded from the place, that the other which I had before thought most delicious, then seemed to me but very indifferent, even as that extraordinary brightness of the flowery field, compared with this, appeared mean and inconsiderable. When I began to hope we should enter that delightful place, my guide on a sudden stood still, and then turning back, led me back by the way we came. When we returned to those joyful mansions of the souls in white, he said to me,
"Do you know what all these things are which you have seen?"
I answered, I did not, and then he replied,
"That veil you saw so dreadful for consuming flames and cutting cold, is the place in which the souls of those tired and punished, who, delaying to confess and amend their crimes, at length have recourse to repentance at the point of death, and so depart this life. But nevertheless, because they, even at their death, confessed and repented, they shall all be received into the kingdom of heaven at the day of judgment. But many are relieved before the day of judgment, by the prayers, alms, and fasting, of the living, and more especially by masses. That fiery and stinking pit, which you saw, is the mouth of hell, into which whosoever falls shall never be delivered to all eternity. This flowery place, in which you see these most beautiful young people, so bright and merry, is that into which the souls of those are received who depart the body in good works, but who are not so perfect as to deserve to be immediately admitted into the kingdom of heaven. Yet they shall all, at the day of judgment, see Christ, and partake of the joys of his kingdom. For whoever are perfect in thought, word and deed, as soon as they depart the body, immediately enter into the kingdom of heaven, in the neighborhood, whereof that place is, where you heard the sound of sweet singing, with the fragrant odor and bright light." As for you, we're now to return to your body, and live among men again, if you will endeavor nicely to examine your actions, and direct your speech and behavior in righteousness and simplicity. You shall, after death, have a place or residence among these joyful troops of blessed souls. For when I left you for a while, it was to know how you were to be disposed of.
When he had said this to me, I much abhorred returning to my body, being delighted with the sweetness and beauty of the place I beheld, and with the company of those I saw in it. However, I durst not ask him any questions. But in the meantime, on a sudden, I found myself alive among men.
Now these and other things which this man of God saw, he would not relate to slothful persons and such as lived negligently, but only to those who, being terrified with the dread of torments, or delighted with the hopes of heavenly joys, would make use of his words to advance in piety. In the neighborhood of his cell lived one Hemgils, a monk, eminent in the priesthood, which he honored by his good works. He is still living, and leading a solitary life in Ireland, supporting his declining age with coarse bread and cold water. He often went to that man, and asking several questions, heard of him all the particulars of what he had seen when separated from his body, by whose relation we also came to the knowledge of those few particulars which we have briefly set down. He also related his visions to King Alfred, a man most learned in all respects, and was by him so willingly and attentively heard, that at his request he was admitted into the monastery above mentioned, and received the monastic tonsure. And the said king, when he happened to be in those parts, very often went to hear him. At that time the religious and humble abbot and priest, Athelwald, presided over the monastery, and now with worthy conduct possesses the episcopacy of the Church of Lindisfarne. He had a more private place of residence assigned him in that monastery, where he might apply himself to the service of his Creator in continual prayer. And as that place lay on the bank of the river, he was wont often to go into the same to do penance in his body, and many times to dip quite under the water, and to continue saying psalms or prayers in the same as long as he could endure it, standing still sometimes up to the middles, and sometimes to the neck in water. And when he went out from thence ashore, he never took off his cold and frozen garments till they grew warm and dry on his body. And when in the winter the half-broken pieces of ice were swimming about him, which he had himself broken, to make room to stand or dip himself in the river, those who beheld it would say,
"It is wonderful, Brother Drythelm,
for so he was called,
that you are able to endure such violent cold."
He simply answered, for he was a man of much simplicity and indifferent wit.
I have seen greater cold.
And when they said,
"It is strange that you will endure such austerity,"
he replied,
I have seen more austerity.
Thus he continued, through an indefatigable desire of heavenly bliss, to subdue his aged body with daily fasting, till the day of his being called away. And thus he forwarded the salvation of many by his words and example.